It's a real pleasure to welcome you all here today. I'm going to begin with a brief prayer and encourage you all to start eating as I make some introductory remarks, and then you're going to go ahead and finish your lunch, and we'll have then Emmett up, our Director of Education Policy, after you finish your lunch, before we have our elected officials speaking. So if you would, just bow your head, and we ask God to bless us and to bless our work here today, but most of all to thank God for the many blessings that He's given us as we've taken on some very difficult endeavors over the last several years at APP, and certainly with our partners, and certainly as they apply to education in America. Thank you. Amen. So thank you for coming. In particular, I want to thank Governor Jindal for coming, and for the Treasurer of Ohio, Josh Mandel, for coming, and also for the parents, for the mothers and fathers from several states that are here today, from Louisiana, New York, Ohio, Maryland. You're the reason we're here, and you are the reason that we are winning. And not just winning, but winning on principle, and not just any principle, but winning on the principle of the human person. So for we understand at APP, and I think as a group, what our founders understood so well, so clearly, that we're endowed with rights, not from the state, but from our Creator. And only if we get this foundational principle right will we have a government that serves the people instead of people that serve the government. So from education that respects parents' roles in the instruction of their children, to immigration policy that treats Latino immigrants the way that we would want the American immigrants in our own families to have been treated, to honest money that empowers the American people and not just the American government, this one principle really underlies everything we do at APP. At least this vision of principle and policy seamlessly intertwined strike you as a bit fantastical or seem a bit too high-minded for today's rough and tumble debate in America. I point you to the success in state after state that we've had rolling back the Common Core by emphasizing the dignity of the person. So when it comes to education policy, our insistence on the human person as the end of a just society rather than just a means for achieving an elite vision of progress is engendering an outpouring of support from the American people rather than indifference. For our vision resonates with an electorate that's hungry for something more, for a debate that's elevated, not debased. Now, admittedly, this particular success in education rests both on the higher purpose of education as well as the passion Americans instinctively feel for the subject. For we all have a desire to alter the future. We all have a desire to shape the next generation, and education policy taps into that desire. It's a force that inspires parents the world over. But this healthy desire to shape the next generation, when unduly concentrated in the hands of policymakers, can become something very undesirable. Central planning of education transforms the impulse to educate one's own children into a very unhealthy desire to remake society, to perfect man in its extreme, to pose on the young what we would never be able to impose on other adults. So let me give you a couple examples of this positive impulse that can go awry when the power to educate is centralized. So teaching civics, we would all admit, is good. But teaching civics with the intent of creating docile subjects is bad. Right? Teaching American history is good. But teaching that American history is fundamentally about oppression is bad. Right? Teaching about the family as the foundational institution of society is good. Using our public schools to redefine the family is bad. So amazingly, lines like this are crossed by passionate proponents of particular policies every day in public schools. And regrettably, the proponents of the Common Core are no exception. The proponents of the Common Core tout a vision of a prosperous America that can compete globally, and a vision of America in which America and America's corporations succeed with a better workforce. Now that sounds pretty good, if only it translated into higher standards. But to the extent that this vision is fundamentally about training a workforce to serve corporate interests, it's not so great. In fact, it's demeaning. It's demeaning to reduce students to a cog in a giant economic machine. For just as surely as education is in part about the acquisition of technical skills, it is also in a larger sense about a preparation for life. Certainly also about truth, or at least if you're a skeptic, a search for truth. And it's also about discernment of a calling. So together these elements of education, I think, taken as a whole, can really free people to think for themselves, to support themselves. Now some countries, think France, have no reservations about national education policy that sorts and tracks people based on testing and assigns them likely careers. It's so logical, it's so Cartesian, it's so French, and it's so not American, right? But the proponents of the Common Core seem blind to the idea that French-style planning of America's workforce is not a good idea. They don't see how the distributed decision-making of parents and children could be smarter than a panel of experts. Well, on one level, this blindness of an elite that think they know better is not surprising. On another level, it's truly baffling. For all the proponents would have to do is talk to an actual parent to get a different perspective. For parents will actually never tell you that the reason they are educating their child is they want America to compete globally with Korea, or they want to boost GDP. Instead, parents will always frame education in terms of what's best for their child. This is simply a point on which parents will never compromise, which brings me to the dirty little secret about the Common Core. It's full of compromises, so full that no parent, full of compromises that no parent would ever make, so full that many states, in many subjects, for many states and many subjects, it actually doesn't raise standards. You see, a compromise can be rationalized when you think you are serving a higher purpose. But when the person is the higher purpose, you can't make such compromises, which brings us back to the parent who sees their child as a person, not as a public policy. And from the parent's perspective, educating the child is not done in the service of a great purpose. Instead, educating the child is the great purpose. And for this reason, when it comes to education centralization, or the centralization of education policy, it's always bad. Education policy is best when it empowers parents and communities. That's why we oppose at APP the federalization of education. And the American people seem to agree with us, in fact, do agree with us almost intuitively. Just look at the history of the Common Core. The proponents had the corporations, they had the states, they had the federal government, they had the Gates Foundation, so they certainly had the money, but we had the American people. And we didn't just have the American people, we had the moms. And moms are a powerful political force. Just find a mom who doesn't believe that the system is serving their child. And the moms were on the front line. They were living the problems that we had identified. In many cases, they had identified the problems before we had. And they were living the way the new standards froze them out of the education of their children. So we partnered, we empowered. That's what Emmett and Jane at APP do best. And we've been winning. I'll be back up after your lunch, and I hope you've continued eating throughout my remarks, to introduce Emmett and a video about our program here at APP that will really lay this out, I think, in a lot more detail. So until after lunch, thank you. He, along with Jane Robbins, are really the two people internally at APP that have brought us the successes and the partnerships that have led to success over the last several years. Truth be told, when we started, going back 2009-10, we at APP didn't see this as the issue that it had become. It was really Emmett that did that back in 2010, 2011. It was Emmett that mobilized the superintendents to come present to ALEC in 2011, introduced the model legislation at ALEC in 2011, and really took this from an issue that a few people were fighting on the sidelines and helped push it into the mainstream. The point I want to make most about Emmett and the way that he works and the way that we work at APP, you know, he and Jane have written the white papers. They're encyclopedic on the issue. But the thing that they've done that I think has really been the most success, and to their credit, has been the partnerships that they've formed with the moms, with the activists, you know, empowering others to get the issue over the line instead of trying to arrogate the power or the credit to themselves. We have a video that I think does this in more detail, and after that video I invite Emmett to come up here and explain to you in more detail exactly what he's done.